Yeah, it's Opie and Anthony and Jim Norton, and let the laughs ensue. we got the death ghoul on this side of the show today.
Very cool
wonderful
guest, Dr. Michael Baden.
Yeah.
But he did like 5 HBO specials, the Autopsy series, and they're fascinating.
The autopsy series was fantastic.
Yeah. You can't not enjoy watching a guy talk about death as knowledgeably and comfortably.
Well, Jimmy, you think this Michael Baden likes death? I don't know. Yeah.
Loves it. Loves death.
He really loves death.
There was always a great, that show, Autopsy, was always a good little mystery thing because they'd have a case, and he would tell how they solve it through the autopsy and find out what the dead could tell you. It was the thing, like the dead can tell their story.
I love when he finds like a fingernail. Next thing you know, he could tell you it was a white male.
Well, yeah.
Between the age of 35 and 37, and he's drowned.
Perhaps we could ask him about that case, the one where they found, I believe it was the tip of a finger in a lake where a man had put his wife through a wood chipper.
Yeah.
Well, I bet you he can not only tell you what happened, but what she said to deserve it. Well, should we bring him in?
Yeah,
he has a friend with him who's I know.
Absolutely.
Hey, Roland, can we bring the good doctor in?
Yeah.
What, he's traveling with another ghoul?
He has another coroner friend with him. I don't know if they like to be called ghouls.
Yes, perhaps not.
It's not the official. Dr.
I know that guy.
There you go.
Hey, I know
Hello,
you.
sir.
Hey, I know this.
You want to sit there?
Peter Dean is the coroner.
Yeah, you got some.
Sir.
You got some terrific eyebrows there, sir.
Hey, huh?
Sunburn.
Easy, doctor.
Sunburn, yeah.
Sure.
Serious American
Show him
sunburn.
how you do things here on radio.
Satellite, yeah.
He doesn't understand. They don't do that in England. They don't.
No?
We have
Satellite.
a lot of terrestrial stuff, a certain amount of satellite, but not satellite radios.
Yeah.
This is like a...
Oh, yeah, they don't have it
We're
over
way
there.
ahead of the curve.
You get to curse on this this medium.
Well, you know.
I'm here to learn.
Yeah, put the headphones on there so you can hear
There you
everybody.
We get the headphones and
Yeah,
Dr. Baden, make yourself comfortable.
Baden.
Thank you.
Dr. Baden.
Yes.
We've done
Yes.
about 12 HBO documentaries, one a year.
Oh, really?
Well, I thought it was 5. Wow, shows you
Yeah,
how
well, that's
out of the
okay.
loop.
You've been sleeping a little bit.
I've been very
But,
Yeah, we were talking earlier how we enjoy the show. The show Autopsy was great. Watching your specials, and you're so comfortable with the subject. And it's
that's what I do.
I know.
You know.
The thing is,
You're comfortable sitting here, and I'm nervous.
yeah, but you know something. Your line of work is a little more disturbing.
It depends
than
how
this.
you look at it.
Yeah.
When I started out as an internist at Bellevue Hospital, an intern resident. Seeing people die and not being able to do anything to help, that's really disturbing. Once they're dead, then they're out of pain and suffering. It isn't.
What's the worst could happen? You get a pulse.
We've had that happen a few times.
Really?
Guy goes to the morgue and sits up and says, "What am I doing here?" And,
Is that real?
Wow.
Yeah, it does happen. It happens because sometimes especially in older people, the pulse becomes so faint and the breathing becomes so faint that it's easily overlooked.
Oh.
And after a few hours, they may come up. We've had a number of these in New York, but they're all over in the States.
What you need that male nurse for, that angel of death guy, you know, with the pillow. It's with those guys, Dr. Baden. Jesus.
That's the kind that we can't tell. That's the pillow is.
Yeah, that seems to be like a really. Let's take that. Let's run with that for a minute. The old pillow over the nose thing when you suffocate somebody. How do you determine that somebody was murdered or if they just died in their sleep?
On the radio?
Oh, we're on.
Yeah.
We're on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, make sure you say fuck a lot.
Hey,
Well,
watch your language,
The
Opie.
thing about that is that we don't like to give primers on how to kill people.
Well, I wouldn't, either.
But I must say that suffocation is the hardest diagnosis for a medical examiner to make.
Is it?
Because whereas shootings and stabbings and baseball bat injuries leave something to see at autopsy. Mm-hmm. If somebody suffocated, when the suffocating device, the hands or the pillow taken off, everything pops back to normal.
Yeah.
So those are the hardest. It was easier when we had feather pillows because the feather pillows would often break and they'd inhale the feathers.
Oh, so you
And
could
so
see it.
when I first started out, we had a few people who had inhale feathers in their windpipe and lungs, and we can say, hey, there's something wrong with this.
He's
been suffering.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jim.
attacked and murdered by a chicken or something.
That's right.
Well, how do they? Wait, don't they tell kids? Don't the teeth leave a print in the back of your lip?
Oh,
So you're pretty good at this. Sometimes it depends on the amount of force used, or if something is pushed in the mouth, like if a sock or something is pushed into the mouth to assist in the suffocation, it can leave injuries on the tongue and the inside. But if it's one of the things that happens with the sudden infant death cases with babies who don't struggle very much, they can get wrapped up in bedding, or they can get wrapped up in plastic. In the old days, they used plastic to prevent injuring the mattress when a kid urinates.
that's great.
They can get wrapped up. It can cause death and not leave any signs. So those are things that we look at very carefully.
I just was watching. I like watching the A&E crime shows, and they had a case where a man he was suspected of killing his infant, and they had it as SIDS. And a few years prior, he had another baby with another woman who died of SIDS. And it turned out that they convicted him of murder.
Right. Well, the thing there is, and the HBO specials you're talking about, we've had a couple of those where the way one often identifies suffocation of babies is it happens again and again.
Right.
And that alerts the police and the investigators that this isn't just by chance. So the ones that get caught are the ones who usually have more than one.
What's the toughest one you've ever worked on where you had to prove that somebody was murdered and there really wasn't much evidence, but you pulled it out?
Well, part of the problem is when we investigate a case as medical examiners, we're there not just to do something in prosecution. We're there to do something for either side. So our investigation was a crime committed. Now, some of the tough ones are when we have a crime. The police think it's a crime, and we don't find any evidence of a crime. We say so. But I think the toughest one was a serial murder in Massachusetts, where a nurse was thought to possibly be poisoning veterans by injecting various potassium into the intravenous lines. This is about 5 or 8 years ago.
I hear that's very hard to detect.
And yes, it is detected because as soon as we die, the potassium starts getting screwed up in the body. The red cells break and all that. And initially, there'd been some identification by the toxicologist, but his information on it was wrong. He had the wrong decimal point, and the judge wouldn't let him testify. So we were able to make the identification in court, not by toxicology, but by the electrocardiogram, which with potassium shows certain abnormalities. That is, when the codes were called, they did an EKG, and we went back and were able to find some of the EKGs and able to establish the toxicology, not by chemical analysis, but by clinical symptoms and electrocardiogram. That's kind of tough.
Did the person get convicted?
Yes, a female nurse convicted, and it was in Massachusetts, which is a non death penalty state, but this was federal because it was in the federal VA hospital.
All right.
So I had to then testify at a sentencing hearing, and the federal prosecutors, were going for the death penalty in Massachusetts. And the jury voted 11-1 for capital punishment, but because one person held out, she's in jail someplace in Texas.
Got to be unanimous.
And she's been in the news every now and then because she has had affairs with various prominent female murderers.
Oh, really?
In
Loving the
jail.
old prison.
In jail, in prison.
All right, so she's a good egg.
Yeah.
She's a fucking goer in jail. How do you not like that? So you've been involved with some really high-profile cases too. I didn't even realize. It said here Sid Vicious's death.
Yeah, well, that was when I was the chief medical examiner in New York City, and Sid Vicious had been arrested for stabbing Nancy Spungett at the Chelsea Hotel, a wonderful hotel in West 23rd Street that a lot of famous writers had lived in. And he was in jail for stabbing Nancy Spungett. And he got bail out, and he came out, and within a few days he was dead from a drug overdose. And when I went down there, his mom was there collecting his things down in Greenwich Village someplace. And he had a very high level of heroin because he had lost his tolerance while he was in jail. So he came out and shot up the same stuff.
Oh, wow.
And he died because he didn't wait to gradually develop the tolerance.
Wow, that'll happen?
Yeah, and that's why often, it's amazing it doesn't happen more often because addicts, there's no FDA approval for what's in the little packets. And when in the old days, when I started out in the 60s, 70s, when there was sort of organized crime distribution of heroin, we'd analyze the packets, and they had pretty much the same amount of heroin in them. Then as more different groups came into it, and there was disorganized distribution of heroin, the amounts of heroin in a packet varied a great deal, and if a kid instead of taking the usual packets, took one from a different supplier and had more heroin, he could die from an overdose. So the overdoses increased.
Wow. Yeah, you were you were head of
the medical examiner's
office in New York City. And what year was that? Because it was.
Oh, I was in the Sid Vicious about 1978, 79. Yeah. So I was in the office for about 25 years.
Geez, so you probably saw a lot coming through there, huh?
Oh, yes, we had. We were up to 2,000 homicides a year then.
Yeah.
Now it's down to about 500 or so.
Yeah, 2,000 a year during the time you were in there.
During the Koch years, or is that?
That was, yeah. That
Koch and Dinkins.
Years,
sure.
Right.
And wow, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, we got a lot more homicides than in England. In England, where they used to not have guns, there was a lot less murders. But there's a lot more stabbings, I think.
A lot more, yeah. They're still angry. They're just using different tools.
That's right. But usually, see, the thing is, when you stab somebody, usually you don't kill them. A gunshot wound to the head is pretty devastating, or to the chest. But stabbing, you have. Person is more likely to survive.
Unless it's one of those multiple, over and over again.
Anger.
Well, like, OJ. We'll take that whole thing.
Well, see, there you are again. OJ, the jury said he was not guilty.
Of course they did.
And you go along, you probably even think Lizzie Borden was guilty.
They made up a little rhyme about her. Yeah. It has to be. Has to be true.
That's PR. Even back then, it was about 1890s. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her
mother 40 whacks.
When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
41, yeah.
Now, the hip hop culture of that day
that was the rap.
Still lives with us, and it obscures the fact that she was found not guilty.
That was some gangster rap back then. Wow,
in England.
Now, what do you?
No, that was in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, yeah.
Fall River.
What the OJ thing? Now, obviously, I detect a tad bit of sarcasm. What? And I know it's ancient history at this point, but where do you think went wrong with that case? I mean, they had him.
Well, I think partly in the United States, the government has to prove its case, and I think there's general agreement. Even the people who think that OJ, like Bugliosi, who wrote a big thing about it, and others who were violently thought that OJ had done it, they all agreed that the prosecution failed to prove its case. I think the criticism in large measure is the prosecution didn't present its case effectively.
You testified I was surprised because I was a fan. I was surprised when you testified for the defense. It actually made me kind of question, what kind of evidence must they have then? Because they got Dr. Baden testifying. What was the basis of them asking you to testify?
Well, the basis, there were two bases, which, and one has to be careful in these cases. We don't testify. I don't testify as to guilt or innocence.
Right.
I testify as to certain points. And with every medical examiner testifies in a case, like in OJ, there might have been 50 or 60 other people testifying who may have had more impact on the jury. But one of the things was that the medical examiner testified from the stab wound of the young man Goldman's body that the person who did the stabbing was right-handed, about 6 feet tall, and stabbed him from the front. And I testified, you can't tell that from an unwitnessed stabbing. It could have been a midget stabbing him, who was left-handed, stabbing him from the back.
Yeah, I always thought that was a little odd on TV shows, especially where they're like, obviously he was right-handed.
Right.
And you're like, well,
he voted Democrat. Look at the stab wound.
You can't, unless somebody sees the positions they're in, facing each other or something. There's no hint to whether it's left-handed or right-handed, and that was one of the issues that I testified. It's that it added in a lot of bad information with the good information. They had a lot of good information. I think the DNA evidence was really good, except that it was presented wonderful for a physician. I loved their 5 days of testimony on DNA. But somebody who just graduated from high school isn't going to understand what they said. That's one of the things that we're very concerned about in testimony is how does the jury understand what we're saying. It's like you must have guests who'll come in and they'll say wonderful things in PhD terms that are true, but nobody understands it. Except, and I think that's partly what happened in OJ also.
So there's like there's a misconception. Testifying for the defense just means that they called you to talk about a certain piece of medical evidence, but it does get presented like, oh, Dr. Baden must have thought he was innocent because he was... Okay.
I agree. I'm glad you said that. That doesn't at all mean that when I testify for the prosecution, though, because 90% of the time I work now with the New York State Police. I worked in New York City for 25 years. We'd be called by the prosecutor to testify.
Sure.
I would hope that they got the right guy, but the thing about it would be that the testimony I give theoretically could be useful for either side, and we have to be fair. And now, half the time when I'm asked to testify in private, I'll give an opinion, and I won't be called to testify because my opinion doesn't agree with the theory of the defense attorneys. So when I get to testify, it's because the lawyers think I'll be helpful, but at the same time, you don't know. The public doesn't know all the times we don't testify
because your opinion
we disagree.
Wow. See, I'm glad. I was curious. I figured there was a reason for it. But it's like you don't realize, like, they would call different guys just to talk about one piece of the evidence.
Yeah.
And, look, if the prosecution is saying you can tell by stab wounds stuff about a guy you can't tell.
That's right.
All right, well, they got to bring in somebody to counter that.
What creeps you out? Like, does any of this death stuff creep you out ever?
Yeah, what would creep me out when I started and still is young kids and children who are innocents. So much of what we do as medical examiners, the victim is often involved in the death. The alcoholic who gets in a fight, or the drug addict who gets killed by a pusher, or in a family affair, the spouse who's been in a terrible marriage and fighting and all that for years, and one kills the other. It's all sad, but there's an understanding of that. When a parent or a stranger kills a kid who's perfectly innocent, especially when I had kids the same age, it really was creepy. Even this Kaylee case, that's Kaylee Anthony that's going on now in Florida.
Is this the guy who killed the little brother? And it's just, I'm not sure.
This is the mom.
There's the mom.
Who's in jail and refused to say what happened to her.
The kid is missing.
3-year-old kid.
Yep.
That's really creepy because he has an innocent kid, and obviously there are things going on that are upsetting.
Can you think of one case, though, that was the most? Like, I guess it's hard when you look at, say, 10 different stranger children. You can't pick which one. But is there one that stands out for you that was just the most enraging or the most upsetting?
Well, the only one I ever cried at, I actually cried, when I was asked to be in head of the...
Pussy.
I'm
kidding.
Okay. No. It's sensitive.
I understand. I had to.
The only one that I really tears came out was when I examined the John F. Kennedy autopsy for the Select Committee on Assassinations that was established back in 1978-79 to review the deaths of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And I looked at that autopsy and the photographs, and it was such a terrible kind of autopsy and photographs where there wasn't a proper cleaning of the body and the proper attention paid, to show our president who had been killed and to show what I would consider not proper respect for the remains really upset me. Apart from the fact that they got the entrance and the exit and the trajectory wrong, in our president, when that autopsy was done by hospital pathologists who never had any experience doing gunshot wounds. Jeez. And one of the problems, when I started out in the 60s, 80%, 85% of murders in New York City were solved. Now, counterintuitively, it's down to about 49% solved with all the new DNA and all the new stuff. And that's around the country. And part of the problem from around the country that the solve rate for murders has gone down so much is because the people doing the autopsies are hospital pathologists, largely, who do not know about gunshot wounds and stab wounds, as with President Kennedy.
Wow.
And that's still the situation in this country. They're good pathologists to look into cancer and heart disease and natural disease that kill 92% of people. But the 8% of people, accident, suicide, homicide, that medical examiners deal with, forensic pathologists, they're probably less than 400 pathologists in the country compared to 800,000 doctors. And most of the murders today, 50 murders in the United States today, will be done by, the autopsy will be done by pathologists who are not qualified to do
50 murders or 50%?
50 murders.
50
about 50 murders a day in the United States.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry. And hospital pathologists do the autopsies who are not trained in forensics. And that's one of the reasons that even with the better forensics we have, the people doing the autopsies aren't, as with John F. Kennedy.
Was he shot from the front or the back, you think?
He was shot twice and only twice from the back. And one missed. The first one misses. Second one hits him in the back and goes into John F. Kennedy. Governor Connolly says he hears a shot and he starts turning around. That shot he thinks hit the president, but it missed. It hit the curb. When the second shot comes in, he's partially turned to look at what happened, and that's why that gunshot wound is thought to be curves around, which it doesn't.
He's turned around
because he's
a little
turned
bit.
and it's a straight line through his back into his left thigh.
And they're assuming he's sitting there straight, but he's
that's
not.
That's right, which he wasn't. And then the third, and he might have survived that one, but the third shot is the one that kills him. That's in the line of fire with.
Sure.
Movie about that.
Also about these, I know the House Select Commission on Assassination in '78. They actually said that I guess through acoustics, they did acoustic tests. They thought that there might have been a fourth bullet, and they said that they think there definitely was, but now they're going back on that.
That's a very good question, and the reason it's a good question goes back. Our forensic pathology panel concluded 2 and only 2 shots from behind, from where Oswald was. But there are other experts, just like in every trial, just like with O.J. And the experts in the acoustical trial said there was a fourth shot, which there's no evidence from the autopsy. Mm-hmm. So they concluded that it was a conspiracy because the fourth shot would have been too close to the third shot to have to reload. It was like a second apart.
Wasn't it they said it was a policeman's motorcycle audio that had been left on, and but then they said later maybe it was the wrong mic that they had thought. So what they were hearing was actually a noise from somewhere else and not part of the assassination.
Yeah, that's right. And the policeman whose car it was, whose motorcycle was with the mic that presumably was open, that they heard the fourth shot on, he denied that it was his radio that was on. He just has consistently denied it. And I think that the noise, I've listened to that, just a lot of static.
Yeah.
You guys would probably be,
I've heard it.
Be good. There was a nice little professor from Queens College who said it was a fourth shot, but there's no other evidence. No evidence in the body, no evidence in
So you have no doubt Oswald did this, huh?
That's correct. No question. His fingerprint, his handprint is on the weapon. He purchased the weapon under a false name. And the trajectory lines up to where if you assume that Connolly is sitting, turning slightly to look at, of course, he was a hunter and he heard the first shot and he recognized it as a shot, which didn't hit anybody except you can see on one of the Zapruder films where it struck the curb. And then the second shot hits the president and Connolly.
And there was also JFK, too. It's funny. It was on a seat that was raised a little bit, and it was more towards the middle, where all the old diagrams, like they showed Connolly facing forward, Kennedy, but Kennedy was to Connolly's left, I believe, a little bit, so the trajectory does line up a little bit better.
Yeah.
And he was. They said that he was kind of slumped down, which is why the suit jacket was raised. All these things that the conspiracy nuts.
The thing about it is that the Connolly was on a jump seat in front, so it was lower down and to the a little bit to the left of Kennedy, sitting behind him. Jump, and that if you take it all into account, it's clear, and we concluded almost unanimously. That that bullet, that the second bullet that Oswald shot, struck Kennedy in the back, went through his chest, went through his neck, and into Connolly's chest and into his thigh.
Wow.
That's the so-called magic bullet.
The whole autopsy thing, where it was so dirty, and it seemed like it wasn't was that just business as usual back then, or?
Yes, that was business as usual. Except it was the one thing, and this is one of the things that when hospital pathologists do work and do autopsy and people die of cancer and heart disease, the people they've operated upon, they'll have the chairman of the surgery department and the residents and interns there to learn from it and to give information about how what went wrong in the operation, for example. Here, when the president is killed, you can't. When medical examiners do autopsies, you can't have interested people in the autopsy room. The autopsy room belongs to the pathologist in charge of doing the autopsy. And what was happening in the Kennedy autopsy is that there were admirals and cabinet members in the autopsy room who shouldn't have been there, and giving him orders. And we asked him. I interviewed this Dr. Humes, who in Washington. We interviewed him. I said, "Had you ever done an autopsy on a gunshot victim before?" "No." "Did you tell this to the people who asked you to do the autopsy? You should get a medical examiner, not a hospital pathologist." And he said, "Look, when all these generals and admirals are there, we don't say anything."
Wow.
They tell us to do something, we do it.
Wasn't he military too, Doctor? Wasn't he military and kind of more subject to orders than somebody else would have been?
Yes, he was a commander.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, and he was stationed at the hospital, and he just so happened, they took the body illegally from Dallas, where they had an excellent forensic pathologist who'd done hundreds of gunshot wound and rifle wound autopsies, and brought it up to illegally because it was at that time a state crime, to Washington, D.C., where the doctors who did the autopsy had no experience doing the gunshot wound cases.
Why did they do that? Did they ever say why they did that?
They say they did it because the Secret Service felt that this might be a conspiracy and they'll be after Jackie Kennedy. They're going to shoot other people. We had to get and there was a confrontation. The medical examiner in Dallas stood at the emergency room door in the hospital and said, "You can't take the body out of here. This is a state of Texas, Dallas County case. It's illegal to move the body." And the Secret Service there, and they had the Dallas police in the emergency room, had a brief confrontation, and there was a concern of some people that they were going to draw guns and start shooting. But even though there was this objection, the decision was made to overrule the medical examiner in Dallas and to move the body down to Washington, which was a big mistake. And I think a lot of there'd always be questions, but a lot of the questions that have risen about autopsy misfindings, because the autopsy report has a lot of incorrect information, would have been avoided if a proper forensic pathologist had done the autopsy, as was present in Dallas.
What about the brain? They lost his brain? Is that true?
Yeah. The brain, see, one of the things that medical examiners have to do is look at the brain. There was a gunshot wound to the brain. So instead of examining the brain right away, Dr. Humes put it in formaldehyde to test it, to examine it, a few weeks after it was hardened. And then it disappeared.
Wow.
In my further investigations later on, what I was able to conclude was, because we interviewed lots of people about where's the brain, and we were able to determine and we interviewed the grave diggers. Did anybody come and put the brain in? It's like old Catholic and old Jewish tradition is when the body's buried, it should be, all the pieces should be put in so God can fix it. What happened here is the grave diggers said nobody ever came, but then we found out that there was a midnight vigil when the body was removed from the temporary grave to the eternal light where it is now. It is now around midnight, where a number of people, including Bobby Kennedy, came. No grave diggers were there, and he put the material into the casket next to the casket, and that's where the brain probably is, next to the casket in Arlington Cemetery.
And wait, so they would never allow the body to be exhumed, right? Is that what it was?
Well, that would have been an issue. See, we considered that, and I had to discuss with other people there whether we should ask for the body to be exhumed, which the family wouldn't have wanted. They made it clear they didn't want an exhumation. And there was an issue. What if we thought it was necessary? They go to court. And we decided independently that, look, if the family doesn't want it, and since we have all the information we need to explain the bullet trajectories and the cause of death, that we shouldn't press for it, and we didn't press for an exhumation.
Should see if the Eric Nagel brain is also deep in that grave.
It's one of our employees. And,
yes.
He's hoping you could do an autopsy on him.
Yeah. He's been found.
What we're getting at.
X-ray show he just has a stem. It's amazing. There's nothing after the stem, and he still functions and walks around. We think it's all motor reflexes.
As they say, they think that lawyers work like that, too.
Why don't we...
Dr. Quincy, douchebag?
Oh no, Quincy was very good. Except what Quincy shows, what the problems are with CSI and all that, is that you can't just let a case develop normally because it's too boring. You got to have the CSI person do the DNA in 3 minutes, right, or else you don't have a show.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of information given these programs that isn't quite true, like Quincy.
Quincy. It seemed Quincy was always out there, and people were shooting at Quincy sometimes.
Yeah, that's the kind that doesn't happen. With Quincy and with CSI, the one person does everything. He does the autopsy, goes to the scene, he interviews people, all of which doesn't happen.
A young girl was murdered, doctor. I disagree. You sit around, I go out and find who did it.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Very good.
But the thing about it is, I think the public, this is the problem I have with Quincy and other shows.
Yeah.
The public realizes at some level that this is all video license, that they're allowed to do things that aren't real. One person doesn't do 6 different jobs in real life. They realize that. What they don't realize is that all cases don't get solved. The thing about O.J. Simpson, how come only O.J. Simpson, only high-profile cases in Hollywood don't get solved? More than half the murders in the United States don't get solved. See, I don't think anybody's done studies. 30% of people who commit murders wind up getting convicted.
Well, in L.A. it's probably going to be 10% with their horrendous prosecution. Did they blow the Menendez? They blew O.J. They blew a lot of big cases, right?
But
maybe if they were doing a case,
they don't. Not everybody gets convicted. Look at Louisiana, in New Orleans, where they got a 2% solve rate for murders. Since Katrina.
2%?
Yeah, they're less than 2%. I think there's one murder conviction in New Orleans, partly, I think, because the very weak
sweeping up.
Very weak district attorney's office.
How did he catch the one guy? How bad was the one guy who got caught? What did he do?
He kept
in the judge's chair?
Confessing.
Hey, let's take a quick break and continue.
Okay.
We'll get into John Belushi's death and some other things. And
sure.
What are you promoting today? We don't even know.
Or do we know? I think it started out I think it started out with Jessica Manzi called about some people can get the DVD discs on
the autopsy series.
Or see what do you call it?
HBO.
What do you call it? HBO on demand and all.
Yeah. They are still on demand. One popped up recently, I think the 5th one or something. And I actually have there's 2 books Dr. Body's written. I had someone run out and grab me one so I can get it signed.
Yeah.
Called Unnatural Death. It's in paperback. And there's also another one. I don't have the name in front of me, but it's called Dead Reckoning.
Yeah.
The New Science of Catching Killers. And these are really it's amazingly interesting stuff. How
absolutely. We're gonna continue.
Yeah.
I want to ask him about the death fields. Have you checked those things out where they have the people laying around?
Body farms.
Body farms.
Yeah, body farm.
Have you
remember that.
walked around body farms?
Yeah.
Oh, I got to ask you a few questions.
he has one in his house. He planted tomatoes.
Body farms, yes. All right. Opie and Anthony, stay there. We're back with the Opie and Anthony show. Dr. Michael Baden in studio, the famous pathologist. And I want to ask, what made you want to go into this field? Most people, when
it just by accident, because since birth, my mother had wanted me to be a doctor. And I wound up going to City College, New York, and NYU Medical School, and just to be a real doctor to treat living people, And when I got to NYU Medical School, at that time, the autopsy room was at Bellevue Hospital together with the medical examiner's office. So when I went down to look at organs from dead people, there were the medical examiners in the corner with all the interesting cases, and I just got interested by chance because the medical examiner's office and the Bellevue pathology department share the same autopsy room.
Were you creeped out by the first dead body you saw?
Oh, yeah. I was creeped out. It's interesting. I was creeped out for a couple of reasons. One, the odor of death. And two, that some of the medical examiners were drinking coffee and eating sandwiches.
I was going to ask you about that.
And smoking. Yeah. They'd smoke while they're doing the autopsy in those days.
Just chatting.
Of somebody who died of lung cancer,
Smoking a cigarette.
And they'd drink coffee, and I said, that's horrible. And that really creeped me out. But after about a week of going to the autopsy room, no more odors, because I guess it knocked out all of my smell things. And I started drinking coffee in the autopsy room.
I got an idea. Are you a fun guy? You like to have a little fun?
Well, as long as we don't get sued for it.
Well, we have a guy that has horrific breath, and I'm just wondering if
it's worse than death.
If it's worse than death, right?
Well, the autopsy room has a very unique kind of smell because you're smelling gases coming out of the intestines of people who are being autopsied. Plus, there's a background of formaldehyde, because you use formaldehyde in the autopsy room to put organ tissues to look at them under the microscope. So this is a very unusual kind of smell. It's a little different than just the odor of a dead body in the trunk of a car.
Right. Yeah. Some dead animal on the side of the street.
Dead animal and the dead human pretty much smell similar.
Yeah, that smell is, ugh.
Should we bring an E-Rock? I really want to do this.
I kind of wanted to.
But if it's worse than death.
He's in a bad mood today, though.
Do you put anything under your nose, like
Silence of the Lambs with Vicks Vapor? No, it's the most amazing thing. Up until Silence of the Lambs, nobody used Vicks Vapor Rub, except occasional policemen. But then when Jodie Foster used it under her nose, it was life imitating art,
everyone started
everybody
doing it.
uses now Vicks. I think the Vicks Vapor Rub is a more horrific smell than the natural smells of a dead body.
Jeff.
I have a feeling he gets in there and gives a nice... I'm at work.
That's natural smells.
And what about the gallows humor that you see sometimes in movies and stuff? Do the guys around, sometimes you got a case that isn't particularly, I don't know, it's awful, but some people, you do feel a little more sympathetic than others, and maybe you joke about an injury.
That's the problem with when cases get videoed and sound is on. Sometimes one does second autopsies for murder cases, and the defense wants their own video, and they have a second autopsy done, and they have the sound on. And you can hear things in the background. And there is, sometimes to relieve the tension, people tell jokes and things. And I don't like that at all when I'm doing an autopsy, because it can be misinterpreted as disrespect for the body, which it really isn't, of the dead person. But the classic gallows humor that when I came in, there was an old, very distinguished first chief medical examiner in New York City, Norris. And he was professorial and huge, and he was dictating a case to a stenographer. That was before, what do you call it, the laptops and stuff like that. This is back in the 20s. And at the end of the dictation, the stenographer says, "Hey, you didn't mention anything about his penis. I said, what about it? Well, the penis goes all the way over his leg down to the table. Isn't that unusual? And the stenographer says, you didn't mention that. And he says, well, why? I have one like that. And stenographer says, you have one as long? He says, no, one just as dead. That's the kind of gallows humor that is not meant to be disrespectful.
Right, right.
Body Farms. I read a book called Stiff that was amazing. It was
by Marion Roach.
It was a book about the dead and what they do with the bodies and how they test them for all sorts of things
and how useful bodies can be after death and helping the community and helping
they actually
train
try
doctors.
Out cosmetics on dead people and stuff like that.
Cosmetics, and they have different surgeons, ENT, head surgeons and neurosurgeons and abdominal practice on dead bodies or do anatomy and do dissections. And it's wonderful with permission from the next of kin.
They put them in car crashes?
Yes, the Pope doesn't like that. Even with permission, the Pope came out with where they run cars into bodies with permission that are hanging down from the ceiling.
Who the hell has that job? Wow.
I had a friend of mine down in Baltimore. The medical examiner there would shoot dead bodies and run into dead bodies, and then write the papers, publish the research, so that the car companies could learn from it, and the people who made bulletproof vests can learn from which bullets really go through and which don't. And a lot can be useful, but it has to be done very carefully with permission of the next of kin.
Yeah.
And the Pope doesn't like this.
Why would he?
Yeah, I remember at the time, a few years ago, the Pope came out and said that even with permission, you're not allowed to run into dead bodies.
They're
doing a lot of that in Germany. The German pathologists were doing a lot
of course they were.
But the best,
those guys
only a certain group, I'm sure.
The best part of the book was how they were describing these body farms.
Yeah, one of the things that's the gold standard, the golden people that medical examiners are looking for is how do you tell time of death? How do you know when somebody's died? And one of the ways that's been worked on is in the body farm is to see what happens to the body after death, how long it takes to decompose. Can you tell from the maggots and flies that come into the body how long they've been dead? And they've been doing a lot of research. Dr. Bass was the founder of this down in Tennessee, University of Tennessee Anthropology School. And they've learned a lot about how bodies go from ashes to ashes, dust to dust. This is God's way of recycling a body. A lot of it with bacteria and with maggots and insects that break the body down.
But they put these bodies in all sorts of scenarios in this body farm.
Yes.
Like, I don't know, stuffed in a trunk or a drowning victim or
yes, in all different ways.
Graves. And they study how the body does in these situations.
And how long it takes to decompose so that if you find a body, you can tell you're dead for 3 months or 3 years.
Right.
And the problem with that, though, is that how fast the body decomposes is so temperature and climate dependent. It all depends. The higher the temperature, the faster it breaks down. And what works in Tennessee doesn't necessarily work in New York or in Alaska. So that there's we're still searching for the holy grail of how to tell how long somebody's been dead.
Do you find you look where the mummies were done? It's pretty impressive the way the Egyptians took care of the dead, right?
Yes, it's very impressive, and it's even more impressive how God takes care of the dead. Remember the 5,000-year-old body that was found in the Austrian Alps? It was in excellent condition because cold, freezing prevents the bacteria from starting. When we die, the first things that happen to start breaking us down is all of the bacteria in our intestines start spreading through the body, and the bacteria eat up things and create gases. And if it's below 33 degrees or 34 degrees Fahrenheit, the bacteria can't work, and bodies will stay like mammoths and will stay forever in ice.
What about, oh God, what is, how do flies know?
They smell things. They smell the dead body. And it's you're right. And in fact, when somebody's unconscious, the flies will start coming in even before the person is dead. If unconscious, we'll see bodies in hospitals where the person just dies by the time they're down into the in the refrigerator. Flies. It's amazing during season how many pregnant flies there are. They'll run around and they'll lay their eggs in any kind of moist surface.
But where do they come from all of a sudden?
Yeah.
Well, Louis Pasteur, I think, found out that flies come from other flies and not from the ethos. And what happens is that during summer, during spring, there are lots and lots of pregnant flies that have these maggot eggs in them, and they'll go wherever they can smell that there's a moisture, and usually in the nostrils and the nose is the first place, or in holes in the body, like bullet holes and stab wounds. They'll lay their eggs there, and we have to be very careful about the distortion that can cause.
Oh, yeah.
How about not sleeping people? If you're drunk and passed out, will a fly actually crawl in your nose and lay eggs, and you have maggots?
Not usually, but
happen?
I've had cockroaches in the Bronx when babies and alcoholics who fall down have crawl into the ear or crawl into the nostril and really cause a lot of pain. But cockroaches don't eat; they don't bite. People don't know that cockroaches don't bite and they don't remove tissue, but they can cause a lot of pain in the ear by scratching the eardrum.
God.
That's pretty nasty stuff.
How do you get one of those out? You just got to go in with a couple of tweezers?
You put water in and you irrigate with a little plunger and you wash it out. You wash the
It comes out like
cockroach
it's on a water slide.
Yeah, laughing, smiling.
Did you do Belushi's autopsy?
I didn't do the autopsy, but I reviewed it and I testified in the grand jury and the trial. No, I saw the photographs.
He was in L.A., right?
He died in
Marymount Hotel, right?
In the Marymount Hotel in Los Angeles,
Chateau.
And it turned out with a lot of heroin and cocaine in his body. And the district prosecutor called me to come in the case because I'd written a lot of papers about heroin and cocaine from New York City, and it looked like he had been on a cocaine high, and the heroin was given by the girlfriend, not the girlfriend, but the gal whom he paid to make the injections. In order to bring him down from the high. It wasn't really a cannonball, kind of. It was the heroin used to counteract the cocaine. That's what killed him. And I had an interview with his doctors and all that. He hated needles, and that's why he hired a person to inject the cocaine. And there were a number of people there. De Niro and Robin Williams were with him the night before, and they testified in the grand jury at the same time I testified that he didn't like needles. That's why he paid Catherine Smith, I think it was, to do the injections, and she was the one who was brought up on the charges that even though he asked her to do it, that's not an excuse.
Was she convicted?
Yeah, she had gone to Canada. And I had to send testimony to Canada to get her extradited back to Los Angeles. And then she was convicted, and she had to spend a manslaughter or something. And she spent about 10 years in jail or something.
She did 10 years for that?
I'm not sure. She may have gotten 10 years and spent 5 years.
Wow.
But she's back in Canada, as last I heard.
What was your greatest case?
Well, I think the one that was most important to me was the John F. Kennedy case, and I think we got it all right because there's still a controversy after 50 years.
Oh yeah, always.
Yeah, all right.
You autopsied, interesting. With the Flight 800, TWA Flight 800.
Yeah,
it's everybody's nightmare because I correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. The plane goes up 13,000 feet, explosion blows off the cockpit, first class cabin. And the plane continued to ascend for, I think, another 3,000 or 4,000 feet.
Something like that, yeah.
Because the wing engines were unaffected.
Yeah, and the weight difference, now you tip the nose up because the cockpit's gone.
And they were alive.
When they hit the ground. When they hit the water, yeah.
Oh, I don't remember where I heard this. Obviously, I'm going to guess it was some kind of an impact death, but wasn't it drowning? Or they said that was it technically drowning?
Yeah, the problem is when you hit water like that, it's like hitting concrete, really. And they had a lot of injuries, although a few people had inhaled water, which would make it drowning, but they probably were unconscious and had severe injuries at the time. So even once we're dead, brain dead, we can still be breathing for a little bit. And when you inhale water, that's technically drowning.
Okay.
But the question about the cases that have me the biggest concern, the two groups of cases that is, one is when I get involved with people who I think are really innocent. They're innocent people that get convicted on bad medical examiner work. Those are the cases that are most disturbing because people are in jail for 15, 20 years, and you find out that it wasn't a murder at all, that they made a mistake, and the eyewitnesses were wrong and stuff like that, and they get out, and the prosecutor says, well, it shows you the system works, because the guy gets out after 15 years.
Well,
and the other case that's most difficult for medical examiners around the country, deaths during police restraint. They're the ones that are the hardest, because invariably there are people saying that he died because he got too excited and he died, and the friends who are the witnesses from the non-police witnesses say no, he was saying I can't breathe, but they still were sitting on him and he couldn't breathe, and he died of not breathing. Those are the cases that become the most difficult, and I think the most important for us to solve correctly, because once we start trying to make sure the police don't get blamed, as often happens, is we're really becoming partial rather than impartial scientists.
Was there, just to go back to Flight 800 for a minute, were there any people that had burn injuries on them that would have been sustained before they died from being in a place with the open wound to the front of the plane?
A lot. It was very confusing at first when I went up to see. There were about 230 people on the flight, including everybody, all of whom died. The first 100 were floating. The other 130 were not. And it was exact number, 100 came out, and they had a lot of scald burns on their body, which was very puzzling at first, but later turned out to be because they'd been lying in the jet fuel. They had full jet fuel tanks.
Yeah.
And the jet fuel is very irritating to the skin even after death. So there were a lot of burns on the exposed portion of the bodies, not on the clothed portions, but they all happened after the death, while they were floating, before they were brought in to the morgue.
Did any of them live? I know this is maybe there's no way to tell, but maybe you know something about what happens to the body. Did any of them live all the way down, or will your brain, because of the pressure, not work?
No. When somebody's falling down, you don't lose consciousness usually. People jump off the Empire State Building, they get in trouble when they land. They're still conscious. Here, we had evidence of some people breathing in water and bleeding into their lungs and all, which would indicate, in my opinion, there was some dispute about this in the insurance claims, because in the civil litigation, the longer somebody's alive, theoretically, the more money the family's going to get. Right. But the important thing is not living; it's consciousness. So I think that after the explosion, there were most of the people who died lived long enough to get into the water and then breathed a bit and had injuries, internal bleeding to indicate they were still alive and the heart was pumping. But it's a bigger issue to say how long were they conscious. My experience with people who have fallen and survive, in stories that they tell afterwards, who jumped out of a building and then survived, is that, they knew when they were hitting the ground. So I think that many of them would have been conscious, and you'd have that much conscious pain and suffering, a few seconds, which could mean a lot in a civil action.
Oh, sure.
But falling 13,000 feet, I just wasn't sure if the cabin pressure, cabin pressure was gone because of the pole. Right. I just wondered if that type of fall. But I guess people skydive.
Is not that bad.
People skydive and
not
fall
like
longer
they're
than
35,
that.
Yeah, and also the skydivers know the interesting about falling objects, bodies, even with the astronauts who fell, hundreds of thousands of feet, miles up. The terminal velocity only goes to about 120 miles an hour on impact because of the atmosphere that prevents that whole thing up. And that's why in the astronaut deaths, the bodies were in good enough condition to identify all the astronauts. They don't smash into smithereens, as was said in the World Trade Center. 40% of the World Trade Center bodies were never identified, partly because no autopsies were done on those that remained. But the excuse given was that they smashed into smithereens or something. Bodies don't smash into smithereens. They stay remarkable. The skin stays intact, even though there's a lot of
damage
internal.
Inside. Yeah.
Your guts
fatal
may shoot
damage.
out your ass and your mouth, right? But I mean, they say that's what happens if you jump naked. Somebody jumped naked, I think, on the Empire State Building. It was like a real passive-aggressive thing. Like, he jumped nude, and then just to give his body to fucking all the guts and blood to blow out.
That can happen. How do you know these things?
I masturbate a lot.
Jimmy's a morbid guy.
You know, if you take this and give this the FBI behavioral unit, I think they may think we have a serial killer among them.
They're not the only ones.
He studies serial killers.
But no, I read about stuff like that. I think it's
I
interesting.
say he studies it myself, but he says he reads about it. It's a little hobby. But he knows more about serial killers than anyone
knows
alive.
all their names and everything.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
But yeah, it was interesting to. I was under the illusion that those flight 100 people had probably passed out before hitting the ground. But in terms of velocity, oof.
It's amazing how the body stays intact, and because nobody's ever done a study on this, having a person talking to a microphone while he's falling down. But I think the evidence is that most people falling from heights, such as the Empire State Building and even airplanes, are still conscious when they hit the ground.
Even at Pan Am and that explosion over Lockerbie, which was full 30-something thousand feet when they dropped, right?
Yeah, there was one about 10,000 when I first started out as a medical student, where 2 airplanes crashed over Brooklyn, and a kid survived who fell into a snowbank. It was during the winter, and he was able to remember things that happened on the way down. But then he died.
Oh, wow.
It was about 10,000 feet up. I think
he survived
the ending.
He survived for he survived for a few weeks, but then he died. He had enough internal injuries.
What's the baby mummification case about? Someone wants us to ask you about
baby mummification.
Ask about the baby mummification case. No?
I'm not quite clear on that. Although babies can mummify after they're dead, we've had some situations where the parents don't tell anybody the baby died. And over time, in warm climates, what's interesting on the desert, and then when we die, the bacteria from the gut starts going in to decompose the body and bloat it up. But also, there's a drying out in hot climate. So, if the drying is faster than the ability of the bacteria to develop, the bacteria need water to develop fluid. If they dry out very quickly, the body has a leathery mummification and can stay for hundreds of years in that condition.
Wow.
Yeah, they just recently found, I think the hand of a passenger from a plane that crashed in the 30s, and they were able to identify this guy.
Was it thumbs up?
By fingerprints
and DNA, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing now.
Story.
They were able to develop some fingerprints from... it was a merchant marine in an airplane, and it crashed in a mountain in Canada, and it was because it was in this cold. After 60, 70 years, they're still able to get a fingerprint.
Off his hand.
It's the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it was something. Just read that one.
All right. Let's say hi to Brian in Kentucky. Brian.
Oh, hey, Glover, so I'm pretty rural. I hope I don't get cut off. I wonder what the doctor thinks of that cryogenics. Is that just bullshit, or is that a legitimate science, or what's his opinion?
It's bullshit. but it's interesting, and it's interesting. Kentucky has a great medical examiner system. Different states have. Half the United States is still the old coroner system, which we inherited from England in colonial days, in which any citizen can get elected coroner as long as he's voting age. Kentucky has a very excellent medical examiner system. It's interesting also that the coroners in the United States are entirely different than coroners in England and Canada, because they upgraded the coroners. So coroners today have to be doctors or lawyers or very well trained in England and Canada and Australia. But in the United States, coroners still are the way they were in the 1660s.
So you can just
bunch of UPS drivers
just
opening up
become one.
bodies.
Yeah, just become one.
What does he do over there with the eyebrows?
He's a coroner.
We have Peter Dean has been visiting me.
Yes.
He's a coroner in England.
Is he famous or something?
He's
Are you famous over there?
He goes to Africa and he finds out where English people have been killed in Africa, and they cover it up. It was that in Kenya.
Oh, really?
In Kenya.
Absolutely fascinating. Yeah, it's been really interesting actually listening to the discussion, and particularly when you're talking about airplane incidents as well. I mean, certainly after Lockerbie, that was one of the big issues as to whether people were alive for the fall itself. And what they actually looked at was little things called fat emboli in the bodies when they were recovered, and found that maybe 70% of them had these little fat emboli, which suggested that they still had active circulations and therefore were still alive during the fall itself.
Yeah, that's
So the
interesting,
same issues
as
can come
Peter
up both
says,
sides.
because our bones have fat in the bone marrow, and if you're alive and the bones break, some of that fat gets into the bloodstream, and the heart has to be pumping
All right.
to get
Yep.
to get pumped
Absolutely.
around. So that's good evidence that they were alive. It still doesn't tell you if they were conscious,
Right, right.
but tells you they were alive.
So why are people being murdered in Kenya from Britain?
What happens is with the system that we have in the United Kingdom, if a body comes back from abroad to your jurisdiction, if it was an unnatural death, you still have to investigate that death. So English coroners get involved, therefore, in investigating deaths that actually happened abroad. As long as the body comes back to your area, you still have responsibility for investigating the circumstances.
Well, how are
of
they
that
being
death.
killed?
A variety of means, really. Not all criminal cases. A lot of them may be unnatural death for other reasons, accidents abroad.
Like Diana and Dodi.
Indeed, yeah.
They were killed in. They died in Paris in an auto accident. Yet the coroners in England did autopsies.
Yep.
Did you get to see those bodies?
No, I was not involved in that one. at all.
Hey, don't look at me. He's saying like, hey.
Absolutely. No, it's
Oh, look
that
at
was
me.
interesting to watch the whole thing develop. But
What do you-
again, it's an example of just how if the body is killed in some incident abroad, criminal or otherwise, it still becomes the subject of an English coroner's inquest if the body comes back.
What do you two guys just like coroners hang out together? Is that what you
Yes,
guys
we do.
and just talk
We
about
actually do.
dead people? And
We learn about it. I learn about
Yeah.
how people die in England from Peter,
Absolutely.
and he learns about
All the-
deaths in New York by just walking the streets of New York City.
It's fascinating when you come to things like the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the range of expertise you guys have here.
That's
is
where you go to
phenomenal.
the same kind of conferences and for forensic scientists from around the world.
Peter, could you say wasabi, please?
Wasabi.
I would. You said you're going back on the what was it, Queen
Mary 2.
Queen Mary
I'm
2
joining the ship tomorrow.
to
in
give
fact.
a seminar. What kind of
Get
fun
close.
cruise is this?
Bunch of old people.
They always have a range of
Oh,
really
yeah, a
interesting
little
lecturers on board. They have general interest lectures. Sometimes there'll be lectures themed to destinations. Now, this one's a transatlantic cruise, and they have different lecturers on board. So I'm just going to be talking about kind of legal history, American.
I don't know. I kind of like rum drinks and feeling hot. And things like, I don't know about listening to.
Caters for all tastes. I mean, some
Peter
years ago,
Peter
Michael
once
and
gave
I
a lecture on the Titanic, and then they forbid him to do that again.
no more cruises for you.
Hey, you want to play shuffleboard or go listen to the coroner talk about pancreatic
It's a
cancer?
little unusual. The first time I did one, they had a British comedian on board, in fact, and he said, first night he's doing a show in one of the areas, and
He was so bad they mixed you two up.
is he the comedian? He's going down the list of people on board and says, hey, it says here they've got a coroner on board. Must be a Miss British, he said, must be a crooner. So for the rest of the cruise, I think they just thought there was some crooner on
You're the
board.
crooner.
But it's interesting how different lectures, you know, Michael and I think we did a Halloween murder mystery crossing
On
once.
Queen
on
Elizabeth Q,
That
too. It was very interesting.
fascinating. They themed the whole
They
thing.
take it a little
which is-
far though and actually do an autopsy on the poor person.
These two would be a ball at a keg party.
I was just going to say, you
around
guys
the
have
keg.
you guys are either really fun or you have the worst parties. Like it's a bunch of people with black coffee and black balloons and the shades are all drawn, or they're just maniacs and they really let loose and have a good time. What do you talk about? Like you're a married guy.
We say keep drinking and smoking because it's good for business.
What do you talk about in your personal life? I can't picture Dr. Baden and his wife just discussing music or what do you want to eat. It's just
My wife is a former prosecutor in New Jersey and now does civil work. And we're writing books now about a novel. We have a series going now. The first one was Remain Silent. The next coming out in January is Skeleton Justice, about a male medical examiner, a female prosecutor, and how they get intertangled with each other, and have disputes and non-disputes. Not married yet. Eventually, I think in book 4 they'll get married.
Are the little passive-aggressive things about the relationship kind of coming out? And
Absolutely.
in the book?
Oh, absolutely. It's. I hadn't appreciated how possessive my wife was of her words. I'll change words, and she'll get very angry with it, and that's brought out. It's amazing we're still married.
Well, like, how do you change the words? Do you make it better, or does she think that you're dumbing it down? Like she'll write something really eloquent, and you'll just kind of put like, "The man fell." That reads better.
Well, I think it's just the opposite. I try to put into Shakespeare. I put into iambic pentameter,
punch it up a bit,
and to try and make it more literary. And she may think that misses the point.
Does she yell at you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From time to time.
Like a prosecutor.
But she doesn't yell at me when Peter's around, though. She's very good when company's around.
Absolute diplomacy.
But if she wants to ask questions about that, like, will she sit you down, like, you're in trouble when she'll start, like, Michael, and then just start kind of going over. Yes.
And she starts saying, what about this hair that was on your shirt? Let's discuss a hair and how much evidence it potentially has.
Oh, that's got to be great, though. You can know everything about science. You could probably just cheat and then explain everything away.
Let me tell you something which I have learned. A good cross-examiner can do very well, no matter even if she doesn't know anything about science. She knows the kind of questions to ask.
Trip you up.
Cross-examination is an art in itself.
What happened with Dennis? Was it Dennis Fung was his name? I think, right?
Dr. Barry Scheck. It was very interesting because people remember that with the O.J. Simpson, where Barry Scheck was able to have the criminalist Dennis Fung, who worked for the Los Angeles Crime Department, understand that he had made some mistakes in his analysis and in his protection of the evidence. But I thought the most spectacular thing was Peter Neufeld, who works with him, cross-examining the most boring kind of thing, the statistician, PhD statistician, world-renowned, and going over his evidence and getting the statistician on the stand to say, yes, I made a mistake in this statistical testimony, and which I thought, nobody knew there was a mistake there because
who would know?
Who the hell knows statistics? But this high-regarded PhD professor of statistics saying, you're right. I didn't think of that, but you're absolutely right. I made a mistake. That blew my mind.
Wow, my OJ walks around.
We got to go backwards.
He plays golf a little bit.
Yeah, plays golf.
On instant feedback, Stephen S. from Bayshore, he writes, has the good doctor ever told his wife during an argument that she better watch it because he can make it look just like a heart attack?
if I ever told my wife that, I would not be around very long.
No.
But
and Stephen S. also has one for the English coroner. He writes, the Queen's not looking well. Is Peter wringing his hands together in joyous expectation over cutting into that royal clump?
I think the royal family has wonderful genes, and she'll have gone for a long time yet.
But also, there's one coroner assigned to the royal family, right?
I would assume.
Well, that's really since Henry VIII's time. They've had a coroner appointed as the royal coroner.
She had a code. The head's gone.
Well, Henry VIII decided that there should be a coroner appointed to prevent malicious bloodshed within the royal palaces. I reckon he could look after all the non-malicious bloodshed himself. Basically.
I would assume he was probably, at the beck and call of whoever's in charge if something was a little fishy.
Yeah, I mean, historically, it's interesting to look back at that stuff, the way it all developed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But you see, the thing I would love to do is they didn't have a royal obstetrician who made sure the baby came from the right person. One of the two things that I would love to do is one, to exhume William Shakespeare and do certain things there which are interesting, and the second thing is to do DNA. To do DNA on all the kings and queens. Where are they buried? All in
Westminster Abbey.
Westminster Abbey and do DNA to see. Who really belongs and who doesn't belong in the lineage.
Boy, would that shake things up. Yeah, I bet there's a couple of gaps in there.
I would imagine so.
What would you like to do with Shakespeare? What would you like to find out?
Shakespeare, what's interesting in Shakespeare, he died around 1620. And in those days, when you died, people who gave eulogies, like Ben Jonson and other giants of the would give their eulogy and then have it written on rag paper. Rag paper stays much longer than wood paper, and they put it into the casket. And it would be wonderful to see if any of these eulogies are still intact, because the body is buried inside the church in Stratford in Stratford,
yeah.
And whatever's in that casket might still be in good condition.
Mm-hmm.
There's a logo. There's written on the casket something about anybody who disinters me. Break his bones or something like that. You know, they were always afraid in those days that people would be disinterred and things robbed from them. So there's an interesting 4-line, allegedly written by Shakespeare, about people not disturbing his body after death.
So you want to get the boys together and do some grave robbing?
Grave investigation. Grave investigation.
What about, you said you did Billy Martin's death.
Yeah, Billy Martin was interesting because he died after leaving a bar around Christmas time in Binghamton, New York, with a driver, and they went off, they skidded off, it was snow, and Billy Martin is dead in the passenger seat, and the driver is drunk in the driver's seat and brought to the hospital. And it always occurs when two people die in a car crash, whether as with Billy Martin or a fire. Often there are fires, and one lives and one dies. After talking to a lawyer, the person who's alive remembers that he wasn't the driver, and the issue came up as to who the driver was. And I was able to investigate the car and go over things, and the hair in the driver's side. Which didn't belong to Billy Martin. It belonged to the other guy. But when I went in to get the hair sample from this guy who said he was in the passenger seat, I got a court order to get the hair sample. He's in the hospital. He's talked to his lawyers, and he's sure that he was in the passenger seat. And while taking the hair, when I pulled it out a little bit, his ill-fitting robe sort of separated that he was in the hospital, and there's this huge impact of the steering column on his chest. And the problem with that is it doesn't appear in the records because it didn't break anything, so they didn't have to treat it. They didn't get paid by Blue Cross for doing anything, so they don't even mention it. But in looking at him, there was the steering wheel impact against his chest, which clearly showed that he was the driver.
Yeah. Did you go to jail for that too?
Pardon me?
He went to jail?
It was, he didn't go to jail, but this came up really in a civil lawsuit. In a civil lawsuit, because he was suing, they were suing each other. Billy Martin's people were suing him, he was suing Billy Martin's. I don't remember if he went to jail or not. He may have gone to jail for a little bit. There was a criminal trial, you're right. He did go to jail, but for a short period of time.
And what about, it said here, with Phil Spector's murder trial for the defense?
Yeah.
What do they have?
I was called in there because, which is coming up again. The Phil Spector case is coming up again. And I'm still on a gag order, so I can't really talk too much about it.
Well.
But the issue is that the weapon, there was a gunshot of the mouth. The gun was inside the mouth, and she dies of a gunshot wound. And one of the things I testified in open court is that 99.9% of the time, when there's a gunshot wound in the mouth, it's self-inflicted. You don't kill people by putting guns in the mouth because they keep their jaws shut. Right. And just the way it works out is it's self-inflicted, and that was part of the testimony, was that the issue was whether he held the gun or she held the gun at the time it went off. Whose hand was on? It's like Chicago. Whose hand was on the gun? You know.
Was there powder burns on her hand at all, or powder?
There was a lot of powder on her hands, none on his.
Oh, all right.
Huh.
Yeah,
wow.
Which is the usual way we tell things. But in Los Angeles, the prosecutor, there was so much publicity about it. They brought a murder. I know they wouldn't settle for anything else except murder one.
But idiots.
That's so interesting how L.A. just like does that
Terrible
because
prosecutors.
Robert Blake. The Robert Blake case.
The Robert Blake case also. I got involved with that a bit because he was in jail for
quite a while
because of there's no bail because it was he was in waiting and hiding and waiting to shoot him. See, there was the death of the wife, plus he was laying in wait was the thing that got him no bail. And the reason they said he was laying in wait because the gunshot wound was going from the jaw up into the head, an upward angle. So the police thought that meant she was sitting up and he was below the window and shot her. That was the reason there was no bail. The lawyer called up and we talked to the lawyer about it. And I said, the thing is, if just because the gun shot is going up, that's how we describe things at the time of the autopsy. But if she saw a gun coming and she leaned to the left, it would still be the same angle, but it'd be horizontal and it's not laying in wait. And the lawyer for Blake was able to cross-examine the person who did the autopsy, the expert for the prosecution, who agreed that was not laying in wait, that this could have been her reacting to a person she saw with a gun in the hand, and that permitted him to get out and to not be in jail while the trial preparation proceeded.
He was acquitted. So, do you think, in your personal opinion, what do you think?
I didn't get involved in the rest of the trial. I think that I believe in the American system. I mean, if the jury said not guilty, it really doesn't mean he didn't do it. It means
the
prosecution didn't prove it. Not prove it.
Yeah, they didn't prove it.
And I think that the prosecution has a job to prove its case. And the problem is that if we know somebody's guilty and we're going to say that we don't need a trial, we know OJ's guilty, we know they're guilty, you're going to have a lot more innocent people in jail. We've got hundreds of actually innocent people who have been serving time, have been on death row and stuff like that. And we have to be careful not to make it easier to convict innocent people. And if a couple of guilty people get free, that's the price you have to pay for not getting innocent people. And so that's a delicate balance.
So do you think, all right, let's put it this way. You're right about the court system. But do you think when Robert Blake talks to God or St. Peter, there may be an issue?
Yes, there could be issues. Well, there could be issues with all of us when we talk to whoever our maker is.
And I don't mean to just keep going down the list, but you've been involved in so many interesting things. What exactly is with the Klaus von Bülow?
Klaus von Bülow was very interesting because a lot of people think... Do you think that he killed his wife?
I don't know. Wasn't she injured once and then killed? Or what was the story with that?
She's still alive.
Oh, she is still alive. Okay, yeah.
She's still alive.
Okay.
She's alive in a nursing home. This happened back in the 1977 or so, 70, around that time. So that's over 30 years ago, and she's been in coma since, but alive. And the issue with Klaus von Bülow, she was in her mansion out on Newport, Rhode Island, and was found unconscious in her bathroom. And the nurse who took care of her, like Miss Danvers in Rebecca or something, was sure that the husband had injected insulin into her, even though there was no evidence. The evidence was faulty that there was any extra insulin in her body, and she remained in coma. There were 2 episodes, right? The 2 episodes that she lost consciousness. But it turned out that there had been studies done at Presbyterian Hospital in New York City that she had hypoglycemia, that she would drop her glucose very low without any provocation and pass out. And that's probably what happened to her, that a couple days after she was in the hospital, the barbiturate level, the sleeping pill and alcohol came back very high, and enough to cause her to go into coma. But my impression is that when I looked into the case and all, was that once the prosecutor had accused von Bülow of injecting insulin and trying to murder her, the doctors didn't come forth and say, no, she had an overdose of barbiturates and alcohol, which she may have taken herself because she drank a lot of alcohol, took a lot of pills, because they didn't want to get sued for missing the diagnosis. See, if they had treated her right away for the barbiturate overdose, she may not have gone into permanent coma. So I think she's in coma, and he underwent 2 trials. First trial, he was found guilty, and then it was overturned in the second trial with Dershowitz and Puccio, Tom Puccio, found not guilty.
He's alive and out right now.
He's alive and well, and in London, and with children and grandchildren.
And she's in a coma for 30
And she's
years.
in a coma.
Do you dream when you're in a coma?
Probably not. You probably may dream, but not know it, because that part of her brain is totally atrophied. I mean, it's like the gal down in Florida who
Tony
was
Schiavo?
Schiavo, who was in coma for 10 years. You can have parts of your brain that are damaged and necrotic that you can't think, you don't see, or you don't feel anything, but the breathing center and the cardiac center are still working. So with proper care, you don't get pneumonia, you don't get ulcers, bed sores, because she's being handled. She can live for a very long time just without any consciousness.
What about the people that do come out of it? Because, I mean, when you look at Schiavo's, the videos of her, it really, even though they said it was a response, but when the father's talking to her and she's like, even though it wasn't like a really good conversation, it looked like she
There
was
some
somehow
interaction going
hearing
on,
him.
sure.
Yeah, an interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the problem. The problem with these things is that families want to, in my experience, I don't know about Schiavo, they want to feel something for their loved one. They'll say, yes, she squeezed my hand, or she blinked her eyebrows, or she looked like she was paying attention. And families want to hear that. They look for that, and it's not always there. Certainly when they did the autopsy on Schiavo and examined the brain, it's not possible that she could have known what was going on from the brain examination.
Oh, so they were actually, the ex-husband was right about it.
Yeah, the ex-husband turns out he wasn't as likable as the family, and he had a girlfriend and all that, but he was right about her being in coma. And in fact, in the first couple of years, the doctors who treated her, there's something to do with high potassium and all, paid out money, because of medical malpractice about Schiavo. And now what they were saying 10 years later is that really it wasn't the medical malpractice, it was the fact that he beat her up.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And that turned out not to be true.
Wow.
So, about Sonny Von Bulow. I know very little about comas, but isn't it like a type 1 or type 2 or something like that? Whatever type you're in, you kind of look like you might come out of it someday, but you never will. Is she beyond ever coming out of it? Because people wake
It's called the nagel.
Yeah.
Yes, we're doing the nagel.
Yeah. Sonny Von Bulow will never come out of it. Occasionally people come out depending on what part of the brain is damaged. And it's amazing today, with all the CAT scans and MRIs and all, one can get a much better idea of which parts of the brain are damaged than was possible, 20, 30 years ago. But it turns out with Sonny Von Bulow, she'll never come out of it. Schiavo would never come out of it. Some people are marginal.
Why won't they just put her to like kill her? I mean, or just unplug the machines, or 31 years?
That becomes
a discussion you need to have with God.
Yeah, that becomes
moral question there.
A moral issue, and also the issue is she's got enough money that she's paying for all this nursing care that she gets, and she has a big fortune to do that. The issue becomes more telling when the person is on being paid for by the taxpayers of the city. Like I'm not going to pay for it, but I want the city to pay for my mother's eternal survival in coma. And meanwhile, the money that goes to that person doesn't go to kids who have sore throats or rheumatic fever or strep throats and all that stuff. So there's a delicate balance as to how much money society should pay for somebody who's not going to recover, even though the family wants it, and there's no limited budget anymore in medicine.
Wow. You just want them all on the slab, don't you? You just want them all.
See, the slab, but one of the things we do on the slab, you see, is we try to help the living by finding out what happened. We can try and tell the families what happened. We can tell them if they have any genetic problems to worry about. And we can help society, if somebody's done something wrong, to punish the wrongdoers also. So the reason we do the autopsies is to help the family bring closure and to help society pursue whatever should be pursued when a death occurs.
Are you going to be called in?
Very good.
Are you going to be called in for the Bigfoot autopsy? Or
I saw the photos there. Certainly looks like a raccoon coat or something. But I think I've been involved before with Bigfoot stuff because people.
Have you really?
Yeah, people used to bring in material
hair or something.
Hair and blood spots that they saw in the woods to ask us to do serology to look for.
I hope you charge them a lot, Doc.
No, I found it interesting. We used to do it for free, but it all turned out to be, not true. So the little experience I've had with Bigfoot, they ain't no Bigfoot, but
we found one in the
interesting.
dumpster though. There, we got to see what that's all about.
They have something that looked like in the newspapers like some kind of old raccoon coat or something.
Yeah, it looked like an old raccoon coat.
They threw some pig guts
23
in there.
skidoo.
Well, but it's interesting that there have been some very well-known hoaxes on the. We had the Piltdown man in the United States. Piltdown was London. It was England, right?
English case.
Piltdown was the English case in the 1910s. Some people at an excavation site in England found skull and bones and a jawbone that looked like they came from the missing link, because it looked part human and part ape. And the professors in England all came down. They said, what a wonderful find is the missing link. And it turned out that somebody was playing a hoax. They believe it might have been Sir Arthur Conan Doyle because he had been in Africa, and it was really the jawbone of an ape and the skull of a human. And he had put them together. And all these professors thought it was real, so that the fact that it was a hoax didn't come out till 1942, where after all of the professors had died, because they were afraid to embarrass the professors by saying, and then it turned out that it was a hoax because somebody threw body parts into the pit to make it look like it was a new animal when it wasn't.
All right, let's go to Alex in O-Town. Alex.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Alex.
I had a question for the doc. I was going to ask him. You guys were just talking about basically the whole procedure with what happens, how much care you should give to somebody that's basically never going to come out of a coma. My girlfriend has had cancer 4 times already, and she's had to go through dialysis 3 separate times. And because of her having such a high risk of cancer, they're telling her that basically she can't get a kidney transplant because they don't consider it worth their time, I guess. I just want to know what your opinion is on something like that.
Yeah, the problem with that kind of an issue, unfortunately for your girlfriend, is that there's a national kidney organ transplant organization that tries to provide the kidneys toward the people who are going to benefit the most. And there was a big criticism. Remember when Mickey Mantle, I think, was dying of liver cancer?
Oh, yeah.
They gave him one?
And they gave him one. There was a big fuss made because he jumped the line and he got the liver transplant that instead of somebody else getting it, even though he wasn't going to get cured because the cancer had spread through his body and he died shortly thereafter. So they want to give the kidneys to those people who are going to live the longest as a result of the kidney transplants. And that has nothing to do with the medical examiners. That has to do with a consortium of kidney donor personnel. And the problem is that there's such a shortage of kidneys that are donated, and one of the things that the government is trying is to get more people to donate kidneys when they die.
Don't you think, though, if you hit over 500 home runs, you deserve a kidney?
I think there's a good issue there.
Sure, right.
Yeah, I think as a human being, I feel that way, but not as a doctor.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
We should let the good doctor go.
Yes, fascinating having you here,
it's good
Doctor.
to see you
Thank
guys
you so much.
and to see what comfortable surroundings they give you, and they give you all this reading material and all that.
Anything we need.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
Peter.
very much
And yes,
indeed.
Peter, thank you for stopping in with
Real
Dr.
pleasure.
Baden. Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you enjoy
Great
it there, Peter?
Fascinating.
Fascinating?
Fascinating.
What was your favorite part?
Just always really good listening to Michael.
What are we promoting, Michael? We should promote something after this hour and a half.
My books, HBO.com.
Okay. Well, we'll
and
have your
a
books,
book,
right?
a bunch of books that I've written that you can get on Amazon. 2 that are Dead Reckoning and I'm sorry,
Dead Reckoning, The New Science of Catching Killers.
Is the new novel that's come out, a series of novels of fiction that's coming out. The first one was Dead Reckoning. The next one coming out in January is Skeleton Justice.
Wow, you got your
With
books
my
are
wife.
named after like heavy metal band albums.
That's what they sound like, right? Yeah, I went to go see Skeleton Justice last night.
Pick up Dead Reckoning.
They kicked ass.
Yeah.
Get out of my way.
The doctor wants a photo.
Oh, well.
The doctor wants a...
Jimmy, what's going on?
Oh, yes.
He wants a photo of everyone around the table.
Us in action.
Wait, you want a photo of us? Where's this going to be published? Where's this going to be published, Peter? Just for you? All right,
The British...
We'll do it just for you.
Oh, guys.
Yeah. Just hang with the guys, right?
Can you get us all, Travis?
You guys swingers? Here's another runner-up line of the day. He saw an opportunity.
Yes, I will carry you. Don't worry. Like bowling ball. Thanks so much. That's okay.
All right. We'll pick that up, Doc.
All right,
Yeah. You get a good picture there, Peter?
Hope you don't do that with vital organs for your job.
Yeah, he's dropping organs.
I don't come to your job and knock hearts off the table.
Doctors just walking around knocking things off the table.
Take care.
All right,
Pleasure.
Peter. Yeah, it's good seeing you.
Cheers. Nice to meet you.
Cheers. I like that.
Cheers.
All right, there.
Cheers.
All right. Well, okay. Oh no, it's okay. Yeah, if you want. All right, there you go. Peter's all, no.
Would you be nice to the doctors?
Look, he's all confused.
Don't
Peter,
do
what are
that.
you doing? You got enough pictures. Peter likes taking pictures.
Oh, yeah. I can only imagine what the private collection looks like.
Right, Doc?
Hey, Mary.
Yeah, the Queen Mary too.
Hey, who collects dead tattoos?
I do.
That's true.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, get back here. Peter, keep snapping your pictures. Your photographs.
Yeah.
Not the
Wait,
actual
no,
tattoo.
real fast. We're still on the air.
Oh.
Because this came in, I didn't believe it. And you collect dead people tattoos?
Yeah, one of the ways we identify decedents is by tattoos. They're very unique. And I got interested in tattoos a long time ago at the beginning, and I've taken thousands of photographs of tattoos of people in New York City who died. In New York City, and regions have different kinds of tattoos. We have a lot of criminal tattoos in New York City.
Prison tats.
People who get them in prison. How do you know that? Prison tattoos.
Prison tats are different, sure.
And in other places, like the people coming over from Cuba had Mariel boat tattoos, which were different, and the East Coast tattoos tend to be different also. So it's been very interesting because you get all kinds of interesting tattoos.
Thumb through that little
I had
photo
one.
album.
You're asking me what's the best tattoo I ever saw?
Well, no, but you could answer
Yeah,
that, sure.
There was get a guy who's a true story, who's an alcoholic, who's dead, and he has on his penis tattoos are always very interesting, and it said on his was your name. And made a prison type tattoo,
Right.
which was not professionally done.
Yeah.
And when the brother came in, I asked the brother, "Why? Do you know what that your brother had a tattoo on his penis?" He said, "Sure." He said, "What was the what did it mean?" Because often there's significance. He said, "Well, my brother was an alcoholic. He never had enough money to get drinks and alcohol, so he'd go into a bar. True story. Go into a bar, up to a guy he didn't know, and said, 'I'll bet you a drink that I have your name tattooed on my penis.' And the guy would look at him and said, 'Sure.' And then he'd pull out his pecker and he'd get a free drink.
Your name,
Your name.
That's a long way to go.
How thirsty are you
Yeah,
where you will just put prison dye ink in your dick and show it to people?
for a drink.
Hey, can you tell if an executive producer is gay by his tattoos?
There are certain gay tattoos.
Yes.
Yeah.
You want to check out some tattoos?
Steve?
We had
Steve.
Peter,
sit down.
we had
still
an
having
elaborate.
fun.
One of my best tattoos is a guy who was a hunting scene.
Yeah.
A hunting scene, multicolored, professional, with hounds and the fox tail sticking out of the anus. He's running into the anus.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a wonderful tattoo I showed, and then somebody pointed out that it was a gay tattoo. I hadn't
I would-
appreciated that.
Here's Steve. You want to take a look at his
No, I
tattoos?
noticed his tattoos. These are professional tattoos.
Yeah.
Yeah, turn
And,
around. Show him that one. Why are you hiding the one that might be the gay one?
I'm not. He's just holding my arm.
No, these are not criminal tattoos.
No.
These
No.
are professional.
Sure.
How long ago were they done?
The most recent one is the one under my bicep, and that's about 2 years old.
But he gets a paycheck as criminal.
But you know what was interesting in watching the Olympics. The great number of Olympians who have tattoos.
Yeah.
But they're not criminal tattoos. They're butterflies and names and things like that. The criminal tattoos are like the cross, which is a Pachuco sign, just with a line, not fancy like Steve has on him.
And then, of course, the teardrop, L.A.
Teardrop for the eye and the drug addicts.
Yeah.
And,
What does the teardrop mean? They just saw on Golden Pond?
it just, as best I interviewed some
theory.
people, just that they were sad about something in their life and the mother
I
died
thought it
or
was because
something.
they killed somebody.
Well, the killing tattoos are a little different. They're
I thought it was the teardrop.
PCB.
no, the ones I saw were drug addicts who use, but they can cross over.
What were the killing ones? What are the murder notches?
The murder ones tend to be Pachuco tattoos at the base of the thumb, where in order to have this cross with 3 lines above it, made a prison tattoo, 3 dots or 3 lines, you had to commit murder, arson, and rape in order to properly put those on your fingers. And then in prison, they knew you were a bad guy.
Couldn't you just get someone to tattoo it on you anyway? And
Yeah,
pretend?
but then if you turn out to be a wuss, you're not going to last very long.
Yeah, you're not.
You'll be the last one on that in prison. That's
right.
The last one you mentioned.
Yeah.
The fact that he gets a paycheck is criminal.
Steve has a question.
There's an urban legend.
That Found Your
apparently-
Music was a good band.
Exactly. That when new bodies come into the morgue, that protocol is to have the anus sewn up.
Yeah, of course.
No.
No,
No.
not true.
That's not true.
Mike, it's not true.
Yes. Someone just suggested to you that you have yours, so nothing.
No, what is, we do look at the anus because sometimes one can tell if there's been sexual activity in the anus by the shape of the anus, but that doesn't work usually either.
But
But,
if
but
they
they
can't-
don't get sewn up because
No, why
anything
would
that's
you sew 'em
inside,
up?
you want it to
Yeah.
come out.
If they can't tell by the anus, can they just look at the expression on the face? And if it's really sad, they're like, well, maybe.
Looks like
You can't tell anything from what the face looks like, even though in books they say, well, died happy, died not happy. It's because when we die, all the muscles relax. And we all become sort of faceless, and then depending on what position the body is in, on the left side, on the right side, in the front, will depend how the rigor mortis is going to set in after death. So you can't.
Can you do a public service and tell people not to watch their loved ones die? It's not romantic like you see in movies.
That's the tough thing.
Holy
as we talked about earlier, when I started out really in the business of treating living people.
Sure.
And I was an intern resident at Bellevue Hospital, and the worst thing was watching people die, cancer, heart disease, and you couldn't do anything about it. That's terrifying. That's awful, and the family, it's awful. But once they're dead, and this is what people don't understand about medical examiners, once they're dead, they're out of their pain. And what we do is much less upsetting, doing autopsies, trying to help the living, than watching people die.
Right.
How about the beheading videos? Did you see any of those?
oof.
I saw Saddam Hussein, and I read about the guillotine. That's a quick way of doing away with somebody.
But I mean the Al-Zarqawi in the Middle East when they were beheading people with butcher knives.
That's awful. That's awful.
It seemed like a really a painful way to go. Like the struggle
Well,
for
it
breath.
depends how quickly it's done. If you can take a weapon like a guillotine and just strike
Slice.
off the head, that's much faster and probably less painful, actual physical pain, than being shot, in a firing squad or even getting lethal injection.
No, this was actually they saw it through the head with just a big butcher knife, and you could hear the guy.
No, that's terrible. That's terrible. Because they saw it through the neck. See, the neck part is about a third of is soft tissue of the neck, and the hard part is the spine, spinal column, and that's where it's hard to cut through. But if you have a person who knows what he's doing, he might.
Could you still be conscious as they're trying to hack through the spine part of your neck?
Yeah, you can still be conscious until they transect the spinal cord, which takes some doing because you got to cut through tough bone.
We saw some awful
I know, it's awful.
videos.
It's an awful situation.
Well, Peter's depressed now. Let's stop.
Oh, wow.
Peter, you're
Well, yeah,
right.
he knows.
we
it
were
was,
all having fun.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, I just,
Peter, you want more pictures? Cheer you up a little bit? All right.
Peter,
All right,
Peter, it's really a thrill for him to take pictures of live people.
Bye, Peter.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Mike,
Thanks very much
All
indeed.
right. Enjoy your cruise.
Thank you.
Hopefully you'll find a floater. Drag someone in for you.
A man could dream, right?
There you go. That. All right, doctors.
A big
take
man,
care.
Peter? All right.
There you go. Very lovely to have them in.
They're fun, right?
Yeah.
They're great guests.
Oh, they're just a hoot.
Fun-loving.
That death is a hoot.
Corners.
What do we got? One more runner-up line of the day. Here it is. You guys, you don't watch TV.
I didn't hear about it.
You don't read papers.
I'm sure I've handed over cash a few times.
Ugly.
Yeah, no. We have anything big for tomorrow?
Yeah, what do we got?
No guests.
Why? What happened with that?
Nobody approved any over break.
Which ones?
No one was just telling me. Hold on a second. I don't know if they're available anymore. Rolling.
Let's try to get him to improv. Second. Oh.
What? His improv skills?
Let's just do it.
They stink.
Did anyone else think that Peter, the coroner, was here to do the autopsy on Dr. Michael Baden? With all that heavy breathing he was doing?
Oh, I think some people thought that was Jimmy.
No, it was
Jimmy's
Dr.
nose.
Baden.
Me trickling the food.
Someone goes,
Yeah.
is he doing his interview from a treadmill? I couldn't do it.
I think he needs the nose surgery Jimmy had.
He was too cool and too interesting to
was
blow
great.
up his spot like that. But
Steve, who do you think we're going to be pitching?
hey, Roland, what do you got?
I'll let Roland do that.
Nothing. Wait, yes.
Oh no, the Norm Macdonald. He's coming in a few weeks. You said.
Is he?
Yeah.
I was thinking Norm would be fun.
That'll be all right.
Okay.
Good.
Rainn Wilson wants to call.
No.
Call that okay.
The Rocker, right?
Yeah. He wants to call in because he's filming The Office
What about
right
Steve
now.
Coogan?
What about the dude from The Office that was selling drugs? I want to talk to that guy.
Well, yeah, we were pitched him, but he'll be back in New York in a month.
Was he the black dude that worked with Patrice in the?
Yep.
Yeah.
He wants to come in. He wants
In
to do the show.
the
But he was
warehouse.
arrested, right?
Yeah, but he'll be
Drugs?
released before a month. He'll be back in New York in like 2-3 weeks.
How about Steve Coogan?
Yeah, they're checking his schedule because he's flying in. For
What about
one
the
day.
guy from 4-Year-Old Virgin who's in trouble for what? Beating up his chick or something? Killed her? What do you do? Stab her?
what?
Oh. Yeah, he had a bit part.
Yeah.
Yeah, he went crazy, killed his girlfriend or something like that.
Are we getting Michael Phelps?
My friend is best friends with him. We're working on that because he's not doing any press. He's
You have a friend that's best friends with him?
yeah.
Come on.
Yep.
Come on.
What's that about?
Well, she knows him since childhood, so
Think we'll get him?
he's coming in. Well, because he's not he's doing secret tour dates or whatever, but he's coming in sometimes.
Does he bang broads?
I would assume so.
Yeah. Full guy.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
There's David Tyree from the Giants.
Steve, you didn't know who Phelps was when we brought him up before? Comment?
What?
I thought you said Felch.
Yes, exactly. I think he said Phelps.
Just repeats this.
No, I don't think I did. But now I do.
You didn't know who Michael Phelps is? Did you watch the Olympics?
No, I haven't been.
Yeah, why would you as the executive producer?
Yeah, Steve. I thought you liked somebody with a swimmer's build.
Yes.
That would be silly to watch the Olympics. Comment?
The Olympics stink.
You gotta watch it for the show a little bit.
Yeah, you watch the highlights.
It's on right now. They got
Watch the
some
highlights.
thing going on. He doesn't even watch the highlights. That's what I'm getting at.
You turn on the
Watch
news,
some
you
highlights,
go.
Steve. We got another
Here's
week
some
of
highlights. Got some highlights.
Hey, Fez. Michael Phelps.
Fez. On Fez, 12-3.
All right, should we go?
Yes.
I gotta make a tinky.
Are they new to 3 or are they on vacation?
They're off this week.
They're off this week?
They're off?
No.
Oh,
Kidding.
I had no idea. I saw him tape a secret show, though. Wasn't that for today?
No.
No, that was for the secret
Are
show.
they maybe doing a mask today or some shit?
Oh.
Yeah, Richard Lewis.
Oh, Richard Lewis is on mask.
Richard Lewis. Yuck.
He'll probably be interesting on mask though, because he's such a fucking whack job.
Yuck.
I bet
He's on Curb Your
Yuck.
Enthusiasm now, so.
I bet he's a good
Yuck.
interview. You like him?
I don't like Richard Lewis. Never
Why?
did.
But haven't met him?
I didn't need to.
He might be an interesting interview.
I didn't want to meet him.
Steve, what are you scrolling?
I had a whole bunch of emails that didn't get sent because my mailbox was full, and I'm sending them.
That happens. I gotta go. Yeah, I gotta go.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I'll push my mic away and say I'm done.
Let's suck each other's dicks.
Do I end it like Eric goes to break on CBS?
Yeah, let's do that.
Go! Go now! End the show now!